Rushdie goes on to qualify his arguments about the diasporic writers and what they should be writing, what is the nature of the write-up that is there. If it is partial in that sense that they don't have access to certain realities and access to the cultural landscape, but he says that something else that they have, probably people who live in those places, they don't have. So he says that what is it that we do that probably others cannot do in that way. He says that that probably the diasporic writer can can try to speak truth to power in that way. He says the state truth about the war in Bangladesh, for instance, that there is no atrocities committed by Pakistan army in the West Wing. This version is sanctified by many persons who would describe themselves as intellectuals, and the official version of emergency in India was well expressed by Mr. Gandhi in recent BBC interview. And he says that those can only be debunked by writers like us. He says, but is this a proper function to those of us who write from outside India, or are we just dilettantes in such affairs because we are not involved in their day-to-day unfolding, because by speaking out we take no risks? What right do we have to speak at all? So he says that like many people have those charges that because you are outside, so you don't have much to lose, the stakes are very low, so you can afford to do this, or do you even have the credentials to say all this, because you have like gone away from here, you chose to leave this place, then why are you talking about us at all in that sense? So that's what Rushdie also points to, and then from there he constructs an argument about the diasporic writer, the charges of location, and their ethical position. Responding to these charges, he says, my answer is very simple. Literature is self-validating. That is to say, a book is not justified by author's worthiness to write it, but the quality of what has been written. So, we can be reductive, and that's what he tries to say, that we can be reductive and say that like, oh, why is Jhumpa Lahiri writing about India? She is an American, British American citizen. Or a Rushdie who has never held a passport about India, why is he bothered about India at all? But he's saying that like, let's not boil down the author's worthiness to their positions, their locations, but rather to what they are saying or the quality of it. By that logic, what he's trying to say, and he's trying to neuter the accusations about diasporic writers here. He's acting as a spokesperson for those diasporic writers, that that you have low stakes in the game and you are probably in the West enjoying all the benefits, and then talking about us in that way. To them he says that look, let's not get into the person or persona of that writer. Let's look at the quality of what has been written. And he explains this by saying that there are terrible books that arise directly out of experience. That it's not as if like whoever is participant in that experience can write wonderfully well always. It also depends on the writer's quality also, what kind of quality of writing that comes out. It's otherwise only people who are participant in a reality have the eligibility to write about certain things. That will alienate a lot of other people who want to write about same subjects. So he's focused on what the quality of what is being written rather than looking at the persona of the writer itself. And the extraordinary imaginative feats dealing with themes which the author has been obliged to approach from outside. Seeing that there are thousands of examples where writers who are not part of the cultural, socio-political landscape have written extraordinarily about those spaces. He goes on to he goes on to give a lot of examples of them. He says that literature is not in the business of copywriting certain themes for certain groups. As for the risk, the real risk any artist are taken in the work in pushing the work to the limits of what is possible in attempts to increase the sum of what is possible to think. Books become good when they go to this edge and risk falling over it. When artists dare, is what he is saying, that when artists dare, that's when we get good literature. When artists start to think what is possible beyond the limits that have been given to them, that's when literature becomes better. He says that there are like n number of examples for this. So therefore, that charge does not hold against writers who are not part of India, that like since you are not from India or you are not living in India, you cannot write about India. The Indian writer, looking back at India, does so through guilt-tinted spectacles. I am, of course, once more talking about myself. Speaking now of those of us who emigrated and suspect that there are times when the moves seem wrong to us all, when we seem to ourselves post-lapsarian men and women. We are Hindus who have crossed the black waters, we are Muslims who eat pork, and as a result, to use my Christian notion of the fall indicates, we are now partly of the West. Our identities are at once plural and partial. Sometimes we feel that we straddle both cultures, at times that we fall between two stools. However ambiguous and shifting this ground may be, it is not an infertile territory to occupy. He now comes to the idea of the hybrid identity of the diasporic writer itself, that like first, after tackling that, like please let's focus on the writing itself, then he comes to the problems and the dilemmas that a writer has to face. And this goes back to the idea of the past that he was characterizing, how the past comes to hinge on the identity of the writer itself. So you can see that he talks about how the how the writers who have emigrated, they straddle two cultures. Sometimes they are beneficiaries of these cultures, both the cultures they can partake from this and that, from the Indian and the American, the Western, European, all kinds of cultures. But sometimes they are at neither places. They are not recognized as Indian writers, because Indian writers think that like, oh, you are writing from the West. You are writing not about today's India even. So, and then they are not also thought of as American writers, let's say for example, or they are thought of as Canadian writers. So they actually fall in between those. So when they start writing, they actually take on that challenge. They also take on that risk of doing this. But he says, for a writer in that's not an infertile territory though. He, as a spokesperson of diasporic writer, he says, because you do not have a home, unlike writers who belong to a home, doesn't mean that you do not have something to draw on or your writing is less. That's what he is trying to push us and all of us to think about, that the writer actually, because of many such contradictions, many such complexities, and because of their unmoored nature, actually then become a part of a very fertile territory, because they are already risking. They are not part of the convention in that sense. They are already part of the risk itself. So they are already participate in what the writer should do. That the writer should actually be pushing the limits, and they are already pushing the limits because of their identity, because of their nature of it. And he gives examples from Midnight Children about this, and he says how, because Midnight Children brought in so many diverse discourses, it became an eclectic book which could tap into these very different and diverse cultural, socio-political economies itself. He then goes on to discuss that how when we are talking about writing itself, and the diasporic writer uses language, when the diasporic writer, because it's unmoved from their own languages, their own writings, they have very interesting, and he's highlighting what are the positives that are coming out from this kind of a challenging occupation. What he thinks about it, he says that we use English in very interesting ways. We use English in productive ways, and which is an argument that has been made about Indian writing English, and some of these things can be also used in terms of Indian writing English. He says, I hope all of us share the view that we can't simply use the language the way British did, that it needs remaking for our own purposes. Those of us who do use English do so in spite of our ambiguity towards it, or perhaps because of it, perhaps because we can find in that linguistic struggle a reflection of other struggles taking place in the real world, struggles between cultures within itself. To conquer English may be to complete the process of making ourselves free. He's saying, why is he saying that, like, there is a ambiguity towards it? Because the diasporic writer is conscious of the colonial heritage, that they are speaking in a language they probably wouldn't have spoken other than the colonial occupation, and also they're benefiting from it. They have a privilege about it. So there is a lot of ambiguity about it, that what should be my relationship towards my colonizer, and now they're inhabiting the colonizer's space also, like Naipaul living in England, or Rushdie living in America. What would be the white space itself, the colonial space itself? They live there, they benefit from those spaces, and yet they are also conscious of the colonial the colonial baggage itself. So that's why English has to be remade. English cannot be used as the British did, and that's why you see the chutnification that he was talking about, and which we saw an example in Rohinton Mistry itself. So that needs remaking, and that's what needs to be done. But our British Indian writer simply does not have the option of rejecting English anyways. His children, her children will grow up speaking it probably as a first language, and he's talking about the predicament of English itself. And in the forging of a British Indian identity, English language will be of certain central importance. It must, in spite of everything, be embraced. He, unlike the nativists who say that English should be not be the language, he says for British Indian writers, and that's why it's a specific case of diaspora itself, that for British Indian writers, English has to be embraced, because that's the only language that they will probably grow up with. Their children will probably grow up with it as a first language, and doing so, they become translated men, because they are born across. They are constantly translating their worlds, their past to them. They are translated men, and nowhere it is better explicated than Mistry's short story that we read in the previous class, where you see how the translation works. Literally, you saw it in the syntax, that like it comes out as the verb, as the syntax of any Indian language itself, and that complicates English sentence structure itself. That's why the English sentence looks odd, as I was giving an example of. So that's why English has to be remade. But also the entire worldview of a Goan Aya in a Bombay city, in a Parsi household, singing Konkani lullabies and everything, that world also is being translated through English. So thereby, one can only access these worlds through translation itself. Translation becomes the key, and that's why he says we are translated men, that we have been translated. We carry across, bearing across, as he says, because English itself, that we are migrating constantly from one language to other, we are migrating from one culture to another, and in our language we are bringing in our past, that partial reality, as he calls it, the fragmented reality, we are bringing it across. So for someone like Lahiri, who is bringing out that reality also, the reality of Indian parentage and Bangladeshi guest, the subcontinental history, all of that is coming across translated. Translated here means bearing across. You are carrying the entire thing across itself, and English is the carrier here. English becomes the carrier here. So to be and then he means that's why he has many of these unanswered questions, that what does it then mean to be an Indian writer in Britain, in that sense? What does it mean to be Indian outside India? How can cultures be preserved without being ossified? How should we discuss change within ourselves and our community without seeming to play into the hands of our racial enemies? What are the consequences of refusing to make any concession to Western ideas? What are the consequences of embracing those ideas itself? These questions are all single existential questions. How are we to live in the world? So he's asking again, past, history and identity are intermixed, and he's asking questions that are very vital to the diasporic writer, and these are guiding lights also to the diasporic writers, in that sense that like they can think about all these questions when they are writing, that how do we write without falling into the racial stereotype? How do we write without giving any concession to the colonial gaze on us or the colonial categorization on us? So that's why he says that that's why the British Indian writer or the diasporic writer is actually in a fertile ground, because they have such deep questions to tackle. After dealing with this idea of of India and the diasporic writer's responsibility, he moves on to who is he whom is he writing for? That who does the Indian writer, Indian diasporic writer, or a diasporic writer, or a diasporic writer, this raises an immediate question of whom one is writing for. My own short answer is that I have never had a reader in mind. I have had ideas, people, events, shape. I write for things, hope that the completed work will be interest to others. But which others? In case of Midnight Children, I certainly felt that if it is subcontinent readers had rejected the work, I should have thought it a failure, no matter what the reaction in the West. So I would say that I write for people who feel part of the things I write about, but also for everyone else who I can reach. In this, I am of the same opinion as the Black American writer Ralph Ellison, who in his collection of essays, Shadows and Act, says he finds something precious in being black in America at this time, but that he is also reaching for more than that. I was taken very early with a passion to link together all I loved within the Negro community and all those things that I felt be in the world which lay beyond. And we go back here and he's talking about who do we write for. So if initially he's talked about the characteristics of the diasporic writer, like what constitutes them is the past. Then he went on to discuss what are their questions and responsibilities, that what should they write about, what is their ethical position about writing, and in a certain way he was talking about the benefits of diasporic writers. The last point he comes to is about who or slash readers of diasporic writers, and through it he qualifies what exactly becomes or what should a diasporic writer be like. What is their approach to writing be? Remember the last point when I was talking about how their vision is partial, yet they are talking about universal themes. He is reaching to that point again. That's why he says that I would have felt bad if my subcontinental readership would have rejected Midnight Children, because it was for them almost, in that sense that I write for people who feel part of the things I write about. But also that when he characterizes it as feeling, then the universal kicks in. And that's why he invokes Ralph Ellison, that even though he was writing from a point of view of a black in America, he was looking at a much more wider readership, wider secular, let's say, for a lack of a better word, which did not need to be only black readership. So in that sense, he is asking diasporic writers not only to cater to the homeland or the readership in homeland. He is asking them to write in more universal language or idiom, or to think about those words and events. And that's why he says that I have ideas, people, events, shapes, and I write for those things. He is not writing about communities. He is not writing about only parochial, for a lack of a better word. He is writing for everything that lays beyond also. It may have come out of the subcontinent, Midnight Children, but it's aimed at a much wider audience, is what he is trying to tell us. Western writers have felt, and he also sees a certain kind of subversion of the hegemony of West itself, and in a way it's a post-colonial battle that's been waged here. He says because Western writers have always felt free to be eclectic in their selection of themes, settings and forms. Western visual artists have in this century been happily raiding visual storehouse of Africa, Asia and Philippines. But when we write, we are categorized as Indian writers or diasporic writers or Asian writers, right? He says that we can quite legitimately claim as our ancestors the Huguenots and the Irish and the Jews, the past to which we belong to the English past, the history of immigrant Britain. Swift, Conrad, Marx are as much our literary forebearers as Tagore and Ram Mohan Roy. So he says that I will draw from both these trajectories. I am not going to be restricted within that diasporic readership. So that's why my list includes Gogol, Cervantes, Kafka, Melville, Machado de Assis, a polyglot family tree against which I measure myself, to which I will be honored to belong. So he says that he will then belong to this international group of writers who write in English. He wants to not belong to this ghetto of Indian writers. Why? Because he thinks that ghetto is a way of categorization, a continuation of the colonial gaze that, oh, these are writers who are writing about India. These are writers from India. He wants to go beyond those national boundaries. He says if white writers are doing that, they are writing about other cultures. No one says that they are writers about that culture. They are just writers. Why can't we be just because we are writing about a certain place? No, that should not be. That's why he says, he takes the Saul Bellows metaphor. He says open the universe a little more. It's at the crux of it, he says it's a reimagination of the canon or the institutions of literature itself. So that's why diasporic writing has much more to offer than just being circumscribed within the limits of nationalities. It's not subscribing or circumscribed by the national itself. It can and has the potential to think internationally, globally in that way, and we'll see that Indian writing in English reaches those heights in the 21st century, where writers then start thinking not only in terms of Indian readership or a subcontinental readership, but then they are catering to the global Anglophone novel itself. Many of them get categorized as Anglophone novelists themselves. So, what Rushdie is trying to pitch for here is the scope, characteristic, and benefits of being a diasporic writer, which at this point of time probably was seen as a limiting perspective, that being a diasporic writer, you are probably not as good or as rooted as the bhasha writers. So Rushdie rejects that charge. Rushdie shows how the diasporic writers are contributing not only to the national, in this case Indian writing in English, but then they are also contributing, and they can contribute to the global world of letters themselves. In this way, you can see another facet of Indian writing in English, the diaspora itself, which contributes so much to the writing and the eminence of Indian writing in English.